Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide a forum for the viewers to ask questions about chess and the chess world. You can send these questions in advance, or if you're tuning in right now live to YouTube ICC, you can participate on the chat, which is on the right of your screen, and ask me questions right now. I'll generally give priority to questions that I've received beforehand, and that has the advantage that they can be more precise and you can provide me with actual positions and concrete moves or more subtle sorts of verbal questions. There are several ways to there's really two main ways to submit questions in advance. That's anytime during the week. It's best to submit them up to the day before the show, but I'll still look at them in the morning of the show. The first and best way is to send the question to my email address at askimwatson@chessclub.com, which I will get to right away. So that's askimwatson @chessclub.com, CLUB.com. We also have a Twitter channel, which I'm hardly ever using, but if you want to, you can send a tweet to #AskIamWatson. And finally, you can send a message to my ICC handle, John L. Watson, L as in lion, which is my ICC handle. And if those of you who are members of ICC know that you can just say message space John L. Watson. Okay, but the other thing you can do is ask live right now during the show on the chat. And let me see, there's somebody on the chat, I see. Anthony is back, fortunately. And you can also talk to each other as you go along, and you can talk about what I'm talking about or interrupt it with some other question. I mean, I'm fine with that. We might as well have a nice, free, open format. Ask about anything related to chess. I know quite a lot about openings, strategy, and I've taught chess for many years, so I should be able to handle just about anything. We like to talk about books and videos. I'm going to talk a little bit about books today because some people sent me some suggestions. I actually strongly recommend that you talk about books and send me some comments, and we can do that because a lot of you I know are people who read chess books. So let's get started. As usual, I'm going to, before I get the new questions that I've been sent, I'm going to look at some things from previous shows. So I was asked in the chat about the King's Gambit with e4, e5. In fact, let me put this up. Most of you know what the King's Gambit is, and we had this question last week. There's the King's Gambit, and I was asked about this defense with check and then back again, which is we call this the Keene defense in our book. I don't know if that's the formal name, but that's because Raymond Keene used it and recommended it. So it's a decent line, I think, and it's pretty easy to learn, and if you really don't have any time to prepare against the King's Gambit, it's really ideal because it doesn't take a lot of study. And that's nice because some of the main lines you really need to know very, very well just not to get mated. So it turns out Eric Schiller and I have about 2.5 pages about this in our book, Taming the Wild Chess Openings. I should actually mention that Taming the Wild Chess Openings, it was put out last year, and a little plug for my own book here, but it has hundreds of irregular openings as well as some fairly mainstream ones or some rare but good ones. And also some fairly mainstream ones that our students constantly ask about, even though they aren't the very main lines. They're actually quite respectable openings. Things like the London and the Tory and the Budapest and the Smith-Mora, the Evans Gambit, etc., etc. Two Knights Tango, for example. So that's our book, Taming the Wild Chess Openings. So anyway, here's a game which we actually had in that book. Okay, so white plays this. This has got to be the main move because it has the idea of knight here, and it protects the e-pawn, which after all is sort of indirectly threatened by the idea of takes and check. So it makes a lot of sense to play knight c3. And black captures. Oh, let me say though, except for knight c3, what else can be played? You probably want to do something about the e-pawn or take immediately. And my feeling about taking immediately is it might be a really good idea to just play this move. d6, trying to reestablish a strong point in the center, because if he takes that pawn, it's very easy after queen takes check. You go into a perfectly good endgame. And if he doesn't take it, for example, if he plays a move like this, I say take with the pawn. You could take with the queen, but take with the pawn because I don't think this is dangerous at all. Because once the queen moves, let's say to maybe here, you're going to play c6. Or queen d8 is possible too, I suppose. And if he plays here, same kind of thing. You get this kind of position. And then here, I think maybe just meet knight d5. Get ready to meet knight d5 and also get castled. And I see no trouble at all for black here. For one thing, this pawn really shouldn't be here. White's a little ahead in development, but it doesn't add up very well, I don't think, for white. I think black's dead equal here. No real problems. You're probably going to play this move. You might play knight c6 and to cover the d4 square, but you're more likely going to play c6. You might play h6 if necessary. You can move the queen and get the bishop out, or maybe think about bringing the bishop out this way. But it's very solid. If you need to cut into any potential attack, you can go out here and pin that knight. Okay, so anyway, just thought I'd show you that really quickly. The other move that's sometimes played is this strange little move. And there I think we just should play just solidly. Just get a piece out, protect e5 again, and maybe yeah, and just develop another piece. Don't play d6 too early because you might want to play d5, and also you want to get developed quickly. I think this is completely equal. That move is so passive that he doesn't have any real threats. So anyway, the main move is this move, knight c3, and now captures is the main idea. Again, knight d5 isn't really doing much. You can just move the queen, probably just straight back. And oh, I'm sorry, you can also play check, and I think that's safe enough. I don't think the knight's going to hurt you on that square, so knight d5 is silly, come to think of it. So white usually plays either knight f3 or queen f3, or even d4. So let's look at queen f3 for a second. In the game he played knight f3, and I like this answer. It's not played as often as f takes g. F takes g is okay, but this is simpler and keeps you going in initiative and development. And because of these squares hanging, it's easy for white to actually come out worse. This position's actually a little awkward for him. So that's queen f3 really isn't a very good move, I think. d4 has been played a bunch. The old Nun's chess openings recommended playing this way. And let me just show you that. Going here, really gambiting away. And you could theoretically just keep taking things here, but it's much more likely that you want to counterattack on that square. And white defends that square. And now a good move is just this, getting this piece out. You're ahead materially now, so you want to start exchanging pieces off. And the main line of that book went there, and this would be good for white, really, except now we gain an extra tempo, so we're equal in development. And either the queen has to move again, which is really not desirable, especially with that hanging, or you have to try and win a piece. But what happens when you try to win a piece is that that's hanging and the queen's hanging. So in Nun's chess openings, they get this far, and they say that this position is actually good for white. Because even though you've given up the exchange, you've got these wonderful bishops is the idea. But the problem is, black has 5 pawns for the piece here. So that's really 5 pawns for the extra piece, and it's not the exchange also, and that's really a problem. I don't really believe this, actually. It's not horrible, but it just doesn't seem to be quite good enough. Let me show you. Actually, no, this position is probably not working, is it? My fault, because of bishop d4. What did I look at here? Oh, I know what I looked at. Sorry. I looked at just go ahead and keep your 5 pawns. Don't take the rook. So now it's 5 pawns for a piece, and instead probably just develop here. Yeah, what about this move now? Now if takes, you're going to take, you've got this move followed by knight g4 check, winning everything. So he has to make some other move, and this is the natural one, trying to save your rook. And then check, and did I write anything down here? Not much. And then just come back checking is good, or even castling. It's very solid for black, and he has this huge amount of material. So now it's 5 pawns. It was 4 pawns, but now it's 5. Okay. So frankly, I just don't believe that line. So in this game, he doesn't do either one of those things. He just plays knight f3, which is certainly the main move. And black plays here. I don't know if that's necessary, but I like it. It's a good move. Obviously, if he takes with the knight now, this guy's hanging. So, I mean, you can play this for black. I'm not saying white can't do decently well. This really doesn't do anything at all, does it? Queens are going to have to come off, and then he just defends that pawn and is doing fine. So at this point, e5 is played, and that's probably correct. It's probably the only reasonable move. And now black gets greedy and grabs that. I don't really think that's right. I don't think he has to be afraid of f takes e, because that wastes time developing. But white really doesn't have anything especially better here than to do that. And now you blockade nicely with that knight, which can also go here sometimes. This is very easy for black to play. I think it's equal. I think white's fine, but it's no problem for black. He got greedy, and it's always a little bit funny to get greedy. This, by the way, is Eric playing black. It's Hosking Schiller, and I don't have the year in front of me. I think it's a correspondence game, but I'm not even sure about that. So he actually took here, and white took back. Now probably white should play here, and then I don't know where the queen goes, probably there, and then just come back, centralizing. And this is maybe, I think white has a little something. It's nothing special, but I think it's better than what he did. He simply took back, and black played there. Now I think there are two ways to equalize very easily here. One is this move. Sorry. Well, what is just this? Just hold on there, because this has been a bit of a waste of time. You just get developed quickly. Knight c6, castles queenside. You can also play there, because if he takes it, you have queen e5 check. So that seems to work too. And if he goes here, you just come back, attacking here. Very solid position. White doesn't have a seriously in development yet, because he can't really make anything out of it. So anyway, in the game, he recaptures. Black should have played either d4 or bishop e6. He played here. I don't think that's quite as good. So now white has some compensation. And it's an unclear position. I still think black's okay, but this time white's got a really nice center. He's got that open rook file, and the bishop isn't particularly well placed here. So maybe he's got enough for a pawn. So white tried that move. Black played there. Much easier to just develop, but I like h5's a good move. Holds on to everything. And I'll just show you some more moves. These are all kind of natural moves, so you can see how the flow goes here. Oh, that's interesting, trying to go there. Somehow this doesn't work. This was actually a bad plan, because this move, queen b4, hits this, so winning the rook in the corner really isn't sufficient. Okay, so he's trying to trap the queen, like rook over here or something. So the queen has to get out of there, and then white has time to take the rook. The problem is that black's the king is very exposed, and black has a knight takes d5 trick, which he plays immediately, and that was check. And now there, and we really can stop here. Black went on to win. He already has 3 pawns for the exchange, black does, once he recaptures that, and the king just has nowhere to go. There's no safe place to go, and that's hanging too. And this is a extremely strong attack, plus material. So. Okay, so that's a fun little thing with queen e7. What I'm trying to show is that it is playable. I'm sure white has some small advantage somewhere, but very, very small. And that means that it's a King's Gambit weapon that you guys might like, actually. A lot of people looking for that. We have a lot of 1e4, e5 players. Hey, best show on the ICC channel. Absolutely, I agree 100%. Okay, we have next a main line for a change. Someone complained about the fact that we don't have any main lines practically. We always have these strange sidelines. So John Hartman, who's on here, asked a question about the Steinitz French line. There, in fact, are 4 different French questions I got. We haven't had any for a little while, French defense questions, which I suppose is good. But all of a sudden, we've got a whole bunch of them. So we'll start with this. This is like a main line. This is going to take a little while. It goes, let me put this up, the first example. It's a 3-part question, really. Let's put up this one first. This is the Steinitz French, and we've seen it before, actually. We talked about this in an earlier show. I can't remember. Someone asked about taking. Maybe I talked twice about it, because there was this thing with queen up and coming down here. Remember that question? And I think there was another question too. But this is different. This is white plays all the normal moves and black plays that, which is in fact the most popular move. I think maybe I showed Magnus Carlsen playing this move on this show, the game against Karyakin. I think I did. So, and besides that move, you should know, if you want to get a repertoire as white or black, you should know that that's a traditional move. This is a more modern move, a recent move that people are playing. This can be played. That's very messy and complicated, as is the same move here, which I think we looked at briefly. Could be wrong about that. And I'm almost sure we looked at this. I remember a viewer asking about this. So we looked at a game with that, I believe, or maybe 2. But in this case, black plays the even more common move, the very simple move, bishop here. And white plays queen up, that's the most common move. And John asks, he says, and now black usually plays a6 or b6. b6 is the recent line, maybe the last 5 years it got started and has been played a lot. a6 is traditional, it's been played a ton. What's the difference between the two and which one is easier to play? And then the other question, which we're going to address in this game, is the very rarely played 9f6, which is this move, is this viable? Okay, and I guess I looked at this quite a bit. I don't remember much about this line. But I think it's playable, but if white plays really well, it's maybe not quite as good as the other two moves, or not as easy to play at any rate. So first of all, a nice thing about it is you're threatening to take followed by take and just win a pawn and wipe out his center. So that's a very good start. And that means pretty much he has to take this. If you look at it, you'll see that that's true. And now this really doesn't work out very well. Somehow it's hard to get that pawn back. You can't get d4 in properly. You can't get e5 in properly. It's close. If black had an extra move, he'd be fine, but this works out well. So that means black pretty much has to take here. At least that's the main move. And white takes. And why does white take? Well, for one thing, black's ready to play a move like this. And for example, with white castles, I'm not even sure if he's equal after this move. This is a problem because the queen has to do something. And capturing is just going to lose the pawn with tempo here. You can't do that. Big center pawns. So here, black's central majority is kind of nice. It's difficult to handle this position. Okay, so white really doesn't want to do that, so white takes, which is thematic, clearing out these squares. He's already got that outpost, and he's got a support square on d4 is the idea for one of his pieces. Okay, and black has to make a big decision here, and he plays there. There's very few moves here because he is a pawn down, and he's got to do something, and knight e4 isn't impressive anymore because after all the queens are vis-a-vis. So the other move you can make here that he didn't make is that, and it seems like a serious alternative. You're just about to just take this back when you have a central majority and you have a few weaknesses, so it's about even. This is just a typical sort of trade-off. There's also a point of maybe playing knight here next and gaining more dark square ideas. So the most important move is this now. This is the knight b5. The pawn on c5 is protected now, and the queens are vis-a-vis. So black will go ahead and take that, and then that's pretty much forced. And then black can go ahead and attack that knight. And then he has this nice move, just sort of chasing that back. It's to expose this piece a little bit more. And this is close enough, close to equal. So it's basically playable, I think. It's not tremendous. It may even be fully equal. So now black's just planning to take. And then this knight's hanging. White will get bishops, but black's going to have this nice center. The 2-to-1 in the center and a cramping pawn on d4. Let me just show you one quick example. There was a game that went like this. I think Korchnoi was black. Yeah, Korchnoi was black, and it was easily equal because black's more active. Black has more pieces out. This is hanging. The move e5 is coming. It's just a matter of activity, which makes up for the bishops. Bishops aren't doing that much yet, and in the meantime, black's going to have some threats. So a better move was the one played, oh, excuse me, it's not from this game. This is the queen a5 line, my fault. Let me quick zoom through this again. It was this move, here d4, here knight d7, attacking both pawns, these two. And then white makes a really nice move, which is here. And it's a little hard to describe immediately, but it does add more pressure to the center, protects that indirectly, and gives you more options. So what happened? Oh, did I have knight d6 in yet? No, I don't. I should have knight d6, shouldn't I? So let's go here, and then here. Now c3. Okay, giving it so that if black takes, this is protected. So instead, black takes with a knight. And it looks like white's going to end up a pawn up, but he's so passively placed. And so in this game, white should play takes. If he plays here, this is not much fun, because that's attacked twice. Black's very, very active. That's quite simple. You can also play, that's what was recommended. You can also play maybe even more easily with just taking it and playing here. That has rook c2 ideas, rook f4 ideas, bishop b4 ideas, and it turns out it's equal. So This is a better move, but then black starts counterattacking, I think with the move knight b4. Yeah, and this position, turns out you've got a lot of pressure. You're on d3, you're on c2, and you still got the rook f4 idea. And it turns out this is equal if you play well. And I won't go into any more detail because the whole will use up our entire session. So there you get the basic idea. In this game, instead, he played that attack. Now, white really can't lose that bishop. That's the key to his game. It's covering all these central dark squares. Also, black's cleared f6, so if he can get rid of that bishop, he'll have an unopposed bishop on f6. So white saves that bishop, and now black plays queen a5. And white moves into the center. I could look at some alternatives, but that's probably better than any other move, actually. And now a nice move. The knight's attack, so it's fairly obvious, but the idea is to come back here and keep attacking those dark squares. In the meantime, bishop takes c5 is also possible, just getting your pawn back. Now bishop takes c5. Oh, well, actually, it's probably what he plays here. Let's see. Yeah, because b4, you always have bishop takes. So white takes, and really this looks okay for black. It's pretty solid. If white has any advantage, it's very, very theoretical. Black just develops. White makes a mistake, actually. He should play g4 and stop knight f5, get a little bit of pressure over there. And then probably that move's best, thinking about moves like d4 and maybe even e5 at some point. And I don't think I'll go over more of that because we've got a lot to cover. But this is roughly equal. This is good enough. And let me just show you what happens instead of that. He plays the move b5, and that's just complicated also. It's not a bad move. The other thing you could do here is you can play knight g4, which might be the best of all because you're attacking these two squares. Bishop d3 really wasn't a particularly good move, but white was completely equal before that, and now maybe he's working a little here. Maybe white's working a little bit to hold on to everything. Okay, so that's f6. So it's playable, but I'm not absolutely thrilled with it. I think white might be able to eke out a tiny advantage, and black's dynamic counter chances aren't huge. Nevertheless, it's pretty reasonable. And let's look now, before I get to the chat. Do I have anything else in the chat? French exchange. Oh, we did that very, very thoroughly. I don't know if there's a best reply. I think I gave 2 of them. What you should do is go back to the YouTube. It's all there on YouTube for free. So go back and try that out. 106. Let me see. Yeah. I'm sorry you weren't here last week. I'm not even sure if it was all last week. I think I did it over the course of a couple weeks. Oh, by the way, I have a little more on the French exchange with knight f3 and c4 next, which I didn't really finish. So I've got that ready. I don't think I'll do it this week, but yeah, Anthony, try out the earlier show, either last week or the week before. We'll look at them both briefly. They're also listed on the lists of what's covered for topics. So we did a real good job, I think, with c4. I showed you 2 different answers. One was bishop b4 check with the knight f6 idea, and the other was bishop b4 check with the knight e7 idea. So and I think we went over both of those, I hope. Okay, this is another game. Now we're going to get to the other questions. The 2 main moves in this key position are a6 and b6, as John pointed out. Okay, so let's look at b6 first. This is the more sort of modern move, and the main idea of b6 is to answer this move with this move. Answer d takes c5 with b takes c5, and then you've got a d4 threat, and white's really messed up. And the other main idea is that if you play the move f6, now white's center is actually in a little bit of trouble because the threat is to capture here, followed by capturing here, and all the pawns disappear. Yeah, and usually that pawn can even be easily lost. So at this point, white really has to do something. It turns out he can play that kind of move without losing any pawns in the center. And that's a pretty good move because it means that this pawn can support the center and this knight can swing over either to here or here to support a kingside attack, and the move c4 becomes possible. So this knight d1 move is sort of critical, so let me show you just a real quick line with that. I still think black's fine. The main reason black's fine is because these rooks aren't connected, so you can play rook f1 check, and white has to recapture with a piece there. And now, this is a tough position. This is the kind of position that black should know. Well, black can just play here if he has to. Maybe that's as easy as anything else. And then throw this in. And white really doesn't want to give up his bishops. In fact, he'll lose this pawn back really quickly. So, so this is considered equal. For example, if if white takes this a couple times, black can just play here. Then there's ideas of queen h4 attacking, and there's ideas of just bishop e5 or queen e5 and taking. So that's equal. So this is actually okay for black to play this way, and I won't go any further than that after knight d1. There are other ways for black to try and handle that. Okay, so what does white do? He takes, just like last time. He makes sure that his center can't get destroyed. Black recaptures, doesn't want to take with a, well, anyway, this is the best way to recapture. There's odd sacrifices sometimes if you take with a bishop, because this queen is on that square too. Okay, white moves out of the way. He's making room on g1 for the bishop after knight g4. And there we go. And so black simply develops. There's probably other moves. Oh yeah, there have been a couple other moves played here. A6 has been played. Queen c7 has been very common, and it's supposed to be about equal. It's worked okay. Basically, in this position, what's going on? I mean, white has a kind of a clamp on e5, but black has two center pawns and has a weak square on e4. Black's weak square on e6 can't really be reached by any of white's pieces. There's not going to be any real pressure here. So it's kind of a trade-off. Black has a little bit of pressure on the center that way. White can't really resolve the center. There's no pawn moves that resolve the center without trouble. For example, if white starts playing d takes c5, black takes back, and all of a sudden white's in trouble because of advances in the center. Also, it's 2-0 in the center. Always count those central pawns and think about it. It's a factor. It's not a decisive factor, but it's something worth thinking about. So anyway, he saves his bishop from knight g4. Black simply develops. Notice that this is not a very good bishop, but it does support sometimes moving this pawn because then this bishop will defend here. So it's got what's called prophylactic effect. It also supports the move knight e4 indirectly. And that's why white just played that move bishop d3, was to try to stop knight e4. Now, Kostenseva here says, quote, black intends the following central setup: queen c7, queen d6, or queen d6, rook a e8, followed by knight g4. I don't know how true that is, but she says because of that, white can't afford to play casually. I think it's fair to say that white can't play too casually anyway. The other idea that black has is to play c4, just for example. Now, this is not the end of the world. A lot of times c4 takes pressure off the center, but in this case it's kind of nice because it threatens knight e4. It's a very concrete idea. There's no easy answer here to knight e4, and so I think black's equal. The best I could come up with was this, and then black plays kind of nice and slowly. White retreats so as not to get his pawns doubled. And then I like this idea. Very typical French thing. Just get over out of those light squares. Then you're controlling these two squares with your knights, and that makes up for this bad bishop. So these are just ideas. The whole thing about these lines in the French is that they're very strategical and positional, and it's really who outplays who. You just have to find the best ideas in a way. It's kind of fun because it's so flexible. Both sides have tons of ideas, and that's nice too. You don't get stuck in a position where you don't have any moves. All right, so white retreats that. Anything else? That's a new move, by the way, but it doesn't do much. I think I'll not continue there. I'll just show you this move. Okay, and a little bit of pressure there. I suggest in my book, actually, we're still in book. In my Play the French 4 book, I suggest that move. That's just a few years ago too. So black attacks the f4 pawn. And white gives it the center. That's a good move. It looks like he's getting to the center, but he's getting some concrete attacking ideas involving these kinds of squares. And he plays rook e8, and they actually, I believe, yeah, black went on to win this, but right now I think white's he's equal. This is about an equal position. I think black actually might have done better by retreating, which looks incredibly ugly. But since e5 is coming, that bishop's going to be nice there anyway, and it keeps the rook on this very useful file. And the idea is, for example, if white plays there, black attacks with c4, gets rid of the knight, and then plays that move again. And this position is very nice for black with this knight e4 threat coming. The French is difficult. These are strange moves. Every move you have different ways to change the pawn structure, but it's fun because there's so many different plans and things to do. And you don't have to suffer some sort of early kingside attack like you do in the Sicilian sometimes. Okay, are there any other questions? Not really yet, so maybe I can show you the third set in this little trilogy of Steinitz Frenches. And this is the longest answer, obviously, we'll have this week. We'll get to some shorter ones. I've got some shorter questions to get to. But, and of course, you can ask anything you want while I'm doing this. I'm glad to interrupt. And this one is the A6 line. So here we go again. Sometimes it's good to show a bunch of games because you get to see the same moves played over and over again. Easier to commit to memory. Okay, and now we just looked at this position right here. We looked at F6, and we just looked at B6. So B6 is playable. I'm not sure if black's always completely equal, but he's awfully close in any case. And many very strong players play it. I think they have faith in it. Black's doing fine in all these positions, by the way. This move is holding up very, very well. And that's the traditional move in these positions, either on the 7th move or the 8th move or now. And the idea is simply expand. Maybe play here, maybe throw all your pawns at them, but maybe just play b4 and a5 and then just swing all your pieces over to that side of the board with the bishop on either b7 or a6. And get a lot of space. After all, space is the name of the game. That's what white's doing on the king side, is getting space. So black's going to try to do the same thing on the queen side. So I'm just going to show you a recent game with this with almost no notes whatsoever, just to give you a feel for what's going on here. Now this knight is reorganizing partly because he wants to strengthen the pawn chain, and the other is this knight would love to go, as I say, either to here or here and support this kind of kingside attack. Get more pieces aiming at white's king. So knight d1 is a move you're going to see a lot. Black just does what I just said, expands on the queen side. Now if black's given a few moves like this, all of a sudden white has no real attacking chances. So white takes advantage of his opportunity to immediately try to attack. But I'm not sure whether this is the best solution or not. He tries to clarify things in the center and then play for f5. First he attacks that knight. And now it looks like there's a sort of a self pin here, but often what black will do in these positions is play knight a4 when the queen is protected and try to take over more squares in the center by exchanging queens. And you can see how that might work. Now white's doing some, b3 is just a bad move as it turns out, and I won't show you how you can improve on that because I just want to show you what black's themes are in this case. All of a sudden this is really good for black because white has no attack. All his attacking chances have disappeared. His bishops are gone. But black's attacking chances are absolutely alive here. He's just going to try and maul white on the queen side. And he's also got this file to work with too. So something's gone wrong here for white. And it's pretty easy to see he would have been okay. If you go back and if he doesn't play b3, there's no target over there and nothing special is happening. So white tries to counterattack. That's a standard idea, but he doesn't really have the pieces to support it. And I'm not going to go too much further. Black simply plays, okay, now there's a threat of knight takes on f2. And he simply defends the f5 pawn and also connects defenders if there's any need for defense. Those are connected. And I think I'm going to stop there. I don't know how many more moves I should do. Well, there we go, open file. So black's a pawn ahead and he's got really good activity. Something went really wrong for white. Now, of course, as you might guess, white has plenty of options and should never be worse if he plays perfectly. But I think black is equal in these lines regardless. So that's the a6 move. So I guess I would like a6 because it offers so much flexibility and interesting ideas for black. And secondly, I'd like b6 because I think it's good and sound and also reasonably flexible. And I would like f6 the least just because intuitively I feel like white should get just a small positional advantage. And maybe more importantly, you don't get many positive chances. Whereas with a6 and b6 you get more positive chances. All right. So let's get some chat questions here. That's my lengthy Steinitz thing. Hopefully you guys will be interested in playing that. Maybe I'll show you the other, some week here, I'll show you the flip side of that, which is what do you do against bishop g5 instead of e5. And then you'll have sort of a complete repertoire. So we'll take a look at some lines like that. And you'll have a little French repertoire with the main move knight c3. And you still need knight d2, which by the way I got a couple questions about this week. And we might get to those, and we might not. I'm not sure. All right, so let me just look here. Yeah, in fact, that was one of my next questions. I got a new question about the Tarrasch defense. This is sort of a French defense week. Okay, what do we have here? Okay, no questions, folks. We need some questions. But if not, I'll just zoom ahead and show you another French thing with the Tarrasch variation, that question I got. Actually, it's a multiple question that was passed on to me by somebody else. I think there's actually 4 parts. We're not going to do them all by any means. But it has to do with this move c4. So let me just start this. It has to, oh, but I was going to talk about something else first, actually. Let me do that. I was going to talk about books, because I always say we're going to talk something about books, and at least I got some responses this week. One listener mentioned Korchnoi Practical Rook Endings is a great book, just as a strong recommendation. And I do think it's one of the most brilliant books any modern grandmaster has written, because he goes into this incredible detail about some of these endings that are just amazingly subtle. For example, against Karpov when they were battling in the World Championship cycle. So it's just an incredible read. You have to really pour your soul into it to get enough out of it. And also for the average player, you might want to have some of the more basic endings first, even though you can learn something about basic endings from this book. It's called Korchnoi Practical Rook Endings. And so definitely I'd recommend it, but I'd say for most of the people probably listening to this show, I'd learn the basic endings a little better. Those are fascinating too. I think I always mention Mueller and Lambrecht's Fundamental Chess Endings. So that's one of my big favorite books for learning. And it's also an encyclopedic book, so you can take it anywhere and you can look up anything in it. I always like that too, rather than being too specialized. Another book response I got was from John Dowling, who's been on here a couple times. He says, I've been reading chess books since 1965, and I can definitely say the chess books have gotten a lot better over time. Most of the chess books written in English back in the 1950s and early 60s, see this guy's dating himself like me here, that I have read were pretty sad when it came to writing about chess dealing with subjects such as calculation, vision, and intuition. I think that's probably true of chess books always, even modern ones. They're just such difficult subjects to deal with. Anyway, he said, I recently found The Chess Mind by Gerald Abrahams in a used bookstore. Written in 1950 and published by Penguin in 1960, the book really surprised me on how well Abrahams discusses these topics. I've never heard anyone talk about this book or make references to it. I think that if this book was republished today, it would sell well because it is so well written. If you have read this book, what is your opinion? And I don't even have that much to say about it because I agree with you 100%. I loved that book when I was growing up. It was a fairly popular book at the time, and one reason I think it was popular is because it was so readable and so interesting. Nobody else was talking about that subject, and still isn't to a large extent. So it's called The Chess Mind by Gerald Abrahams, and I would have used it in my middle game book perhaps, just because it's such a good book, except that I think I didn't have a copy. I definitely don't have one now. I'm sure you could get it on, well, not totally sure, but I'll bet if you looked at Amazon or eBay or something, there's probably a copy somewhere. I had my book for years, and so I don't know what happened to it. Too many moves. Then there was another question about, are there any good books on the Marshall Gambit and the Ruy Lopez? And let me show the Marshall first, which I don't know if we've looked at a single main Marshall line. We may have at one point or another, but it's interesting that we haven't. Okay, so here's the old Ruy Lopez main line. And black is playing here. White defends the pawn, so black chases him. And now we all know about this move. That's your solid variation that might lead to the Chigorin, or might lead to the Breyer, or might lead to the Zaitsev, or whatever. But sometimes black castles first. The only problem with castling first is that there is this anti-Marshall line, so you really have to know what you're doing. It's easier to play against the anti-Marshall if you've already played d6. That's why some people don't castle and then play d6. They have a tendency to play d6 or d6 with another idea, or castles with the idea of the Marshall. So after castles, white is playing like this, and usually if black plays here now, white will play here, and you've all seen these kinds of positions. And in fact, this is probably a good place to start talking, because I was going to recommend Boligan's recent book, a huge book, I think it's over 500 pages, on e4, e5. And the nice thing is it's very recent, so it's got the most current theory. He gives 2 Ruy Lopez solutions here. Well, actually, the move before, but one of his solutions is playing calmly and carefully with the Breyer. You've all seen the Breyer. Well, I was asked about this actually once. That's right, we've looked at a little bit of mainline Ruy. And this is called the Breyer defense. You play here, you often play c6, and you can play rook e8, and there's all kinds of ideas here. But that's a solid way to play that gives you a lot of winning chances, because the pieces are all still on the board, and there's all kinds of maneuvering ahead. Very popular. The other thing you can do, however, is the minute he plays c3, you can play the Marshal. So Bolligan in his book gives both these things, and the reason he gives both in a way is because he thinks the Marshal is sound and fine, but he also thinks this is the Marshal Gambit. It's a Gambit because white can capture that pawn. And he thinks that it's sound and fine, but he also thinks that white has many ways to draw, almost by force, which I think everybody thinks. The Marshal is considered a drawing line now for, at least on the highest levels, it's considered, and a lot of the high-level players play the Marshal or threaten to play it, and white has to avoid it. In fact, the Berlin defense is known as the problem with the Ruy Lopez these days, but so is the Marshal. No one could crack the Marshal. So many of the top players played the Marshal to get a draw with black, or better if white tries for too much. It goes kind of crazy. So that's why Bolligan gives you two lines, is he knows that white can draw almost by force when you play this line. Because after all, white is a pawn up, so black has to play actively. And the main line is this. Sometimes people try to revive this. Somehow it never quite seems to happen. So the main line is this. And, well, we don't have to go on and on. But anyway, the best book about this that I know of is Bolligan. And I wanted to mention that even though it's not a book, Jan Gustafsson's video series on e4, e5 and the Marshal. I think he has 2 DVDs, and maybe I think they're videos for sure, and I think they're also DVDs on the Marshal. So he's one of the great Marshal experts, Jan Gustafsson, although of course the top elite players are probably even more expert because they have to play it at the very highest level very, very deeply. But I think if you got that video, which is from maybe 2 years ago now, I'm just guessing, you could put together a pretty good repertoire. So that and Bolligan's book, and there are actually several other good sources for the Marshal, but those are the two best that I can think about. I think the Marshal is a little linear too. Aha, John Hartman's a little skeptical. We're talking about oh no, Morozevich. Oh, Meyer, oh, we're going way back. Okay, we finally got some chat stuff here. This is great. Let me catch up. I'll stop for a moment. All French all the time, exactly. There we go. I'm surprised we haven't had more questions on the French in a way, just because it's sort of my specialty. Best player of the French is probably Meyer, yeah. We talked about Meyer's main weapon with the Rubinstein variation. That was either last week or the week before, right? Playing knight d7 and then knight f6, which is fun. That's Hans Leinrock's book. Someone was asking about a book for that. Meyer's one of the French experts. I think there are better ones, but he's certainly good. It gets a bad rap because of the light squared bishop. Who was the last elite player that played the French on the regular? Okay, on a regular basis, in other words. That's a good point. I think what you'll find is the elite players play very few. There really aren't any elite players that play the Peerts regularly, the Caro-Kann regularly, the Scandinavian regularly, what's left? I don't know. They only play 2 things regularly, which is e4, e5, and e4, c5. But there are plenty of players. Almost every player in the top 10 has played the French, including, for example, Magnus Carlsen. Anand has played it several times. Nakamura's played it quite a bit. Caruana's played it more than any of those guys, but certainly it's not his main opening. So the question is, who plays it as an absolute top weapon? And then you have to go down mostly into the 2650, 2700 kind of range. I think partly the reason for that is, as black, these top guys are really just trying to draw as black a lot of the time. That's why you see so many of these e4, e5s, when you used to see more Frenches, actually. And because they're just trying to draw, the French is a little more difficult. It's more complicated. There's many more chances for white to complicate it and make it double-edged. So whereas e4, e5, it's very hard to make a double-edged game out of it. I think we've seen that many, many times. I mean, all the old open lines are pretty much gone, and then the closed lines are very closed and simple, and they get simplified, and there isn't much way to get much of an initiative. So a lot of this is practical. The reason you don't find it much at the very top. Nevertheless, like I say, Caruana and Nakamura, and I'm trying to think who else. Well, who's up there? Could be, I guess people are sort of rotating in and out, but Morozevich, of course, but he's not in the top anymore. But he was number 3. He was still playing it. That's true. And but basically, if you look at the 10 through 20, 10 through 30, you'll find a bunch of French players. And of course, the last super players that played it were Korchnoi and who else? Well, obviously Botvinnik, but we don't have to go that far back. Ullmann was a very top player who played it all the time. And just trying to think. Probably not sure who I'm missing. But So yeah, so the French is doing very well theoretically, very well. One thing you'll find is almost all the main defenses against d4 and e4 are doing just fine. They're doing really well, and you might say, well, why aren't they played all the time? It's a practical matter. It's an easy way. I mean, for example, Carlsen's very flexible, and he threw a French out just because he thought he might. He throws it out once in a while just because he thinks the player he's playing might not be sort of ready for it. But it's not easy to keep up with French defense theory. So you're only going to keep up with one major defense, usually maybe two, and that tends to be e4, e5 these days, and maybe e4, c5, some Sicilian system. Okay. Morozevich played unorthodox style. Yeah, and some of them, he played some main lines and he played some unorthodox lines. He invented a lot of lines that are now very standard. For example, in the Tarrasch, in fact, that was one of the questions this week, was about this line with 97. He didn't invent this at all. In fact, yes, everyone used to play this. A lot of people used to play it, but he made it kind of famous. He came up with some new lines in this variation. For example, one of the lines that he emphasized was this order. He won a lot of games in this with this position, this kind of thing, and if that, and yeah, there are a lot of options. Queen e2 is the most common move, and he won a whole bunch of games for that and drew a bunch of others against the very top players of the world. And it's still respectable. In fact, White doesn't usually play this way anymore, just because it's so respectable. So, and Bishop e7 is still doing quite well. What other French things? Well, there's the Morozevich variation, which is this here, and black plays here. I'm sorry, black takes. Sorry about that. And black plays here, and white takes this now, which looks a little odd, but when you start looking at your alternatives, there is a threat of knight takes. And it turns out that's the best alternative, probably. And Morozevich took there. This is actually still a respectable recapture, and it was the most common one by far, but Morozevich came up with some new ideas in this position, using that file, using f5 and bishop f6, and mainly using, well, he played a6 and b5 and bishop e7 a lot. You can also just play b6. That's called the Morozevich variation. Okay, so yeah, he was a big French player, come to think of it. And now we have Vitiugov's a big French player, for example. Trying to think about Moskalenko, of course. Okay, I'm a little skeptical about that book. That's which book? Which book? I missed something? I think I missed something. Maybe that's the Bologan book. Who's that, John? Is that the Bologan book? Anyway, I think that's, okay, French. We're still going on. I think Fischer had problems against, he did have some problems against the French. Yeah, especially when people played main lines, he had trouble. Once in a while he did okay. If someone played a really stupid passive line, he ate that stuff alive. But when he had to play against main lines, he had problems. What's the best play to d4 for French? Yeah, see, I don't really believe that your opening should be based on what you play against. If anything, you might want to try and play something that doesn't go that well. With, for example, all these players that play this against everything, I think it's very limiting. And sure, if you wanted to play something sort of like the French against d-pawn, seems like I've answered this question before, and now I can't think what the right answer would be. I guess you would play a Nimzo-Indian-ish kind of thing. I mean, you could play a Queen's Gambit decline just because it's the same pawn structure, right? But I don't think that's very French-like. This position isn't really very French-like. I think the one that comes closest is, for example, a Nimzo-Indian-ish thing, like that. That's a little more Frenchy, because it's like the Winnower variation where you try and double these pawns, and you work on light squares in the center, and you can always play d5 later, and you still have that French pawn structure. But I wouldn't worry about it. I don't think I'd try to imitate openings for black. In other words, don't try to play things that are similar unless you just absolutely love them. You're probably better off finding things that are a little different style, because you learn more, in my opinion. Sure, you can play e6 right away too, for sure, because for one thing they might play here. Then you've got your French, and you could play the English defense. It's really underrated, I think. You can play this move now. It's not that Frenchy, but it's fun. There are other ways to get the French, for example, even against this, not the French, but something sort of similar. When you play there, and maybe things where you play back, and if they play e4, you play. This is quite French defense-like, but you just have to look at the lines individually and see what appeals to you. I would say don't try to get into a French type position from a d4. For one thing, it's probably not good for you, but also you probably won't succeed in getting quite what you want. So yeah, anyway, this is the English defense, for example. That's kind of fun. I don't know how Frenchy it is, but you can play 1e6 with the idea of playing a unique position. You can always play f5 after e6 and play a Dutch defense. All right. Oh, good. Some questions. Queen's Gambit decline setup. Yeah, I don't really think so. I don't think the Queen's Gambit declined, as I just mentioned, is very French-like or has much to do with the French. Just my opinion. It's hard to get positions that resemble the French, whereas at least with the Nimzo Indian and Bogo Indian and those kinds of things, you get things that are a little more French defense-oriented. What do you think of the Steinitz variation in the Ruy Lopez 3d6 or even modern Steinitz? Rage in the old days is still fine for black. Okay. Let me just do this here. We're going back. Okay, so here's the Ruy Lopez, and here's the Steinitz, which has recently been revived a little bit, I think. That's the old Steinitz. The deferred Steinitz was more popular for a while. I think now it's actually less popular. Isn't that strange? Of course, the deferred Steinitz has the wonderful, what's it called? Noah's Ark trap that can happen fairly easily. I don't remember how exactly the timing is, but something like this, and all of a sudden, oops, sorry, b5. All of a sudden you get something like this. Boy, I can't remember anything. I'm terrible. And if white takes it, then you have this little move and followed by c4. I think that usually comes from the deferred Steinitz, actually, that Noah's Ark trap. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. One problem with the deferred is that white can play this move. Oops, sorry, castles is in. White can play c4 and get a Maroczy bind kind of position with d4. In fact, that's what I used to do as white when I was an e4 player. I always liked that move. Supposedly it's equal if black knows exactly what he's doing, but I was always very comfortable as white. I don't know how the main lines stand. That's the only problem. I don't know exactly what's going on with the main lines. I have noticed, though, that people are playing the old Steinitz a little more. And then now people don't seem to play queen takes anymore, which was something that people played for a long time, sort of the Philidor kind of solution. The idea being to give up the bishop and then play here and bishop g5 and castles queenside. People seem to be playing with knight takes d4 instead. And then you just play back. And a lot of times black tries to get this move in, g6. And I don't know how it stands theoretically. In other words, if you really break this down, I have no idea what I'm saying here because I don't actually know the theory at all anymore. But this is the older Steinitz, and I think sometimes black just tried to hold on to d. Well, but the problem was trying to hold on to d6 was the thing that Tarrasch finally broke down, right? There was that long line that, in other words, after here, this is the famous old line. Someone's going to have to help me here. What is it? When black used to try to, oh yeah, black would play here because if taking, you could counterattack on that. And then black would play here. White would defend that, finally ready to take and take here. And then there was this long line, and where, this is 19th century stuff, where it turned out you couldn't play this because tactically it didn't work. Even though white wins this, and then the queens come out, and it looks like black's doing okay, but there's some move and it doesn't work. So I bet, this is all in the old books. So that meant that after a time passed, black had to take that. Black had to surrender the center. And then you get all these very, very famous games. These tremendous, with Lasker, for example. There's the Capablanca line and the Lasker line where something like this happens here, and then Capablanca came up with this move, queen c3, hitting here, followed by knight d4. There's also the famous Lasker game where he plays rook, I think it came out of this line, rook e8 and knight d7, rook e8, and the rook went to e5 to defend against Tarrasch in the famous game. All better for white. Why did I stop hitting e4? Just variety, I think. I don't know. I also, there were too many forcing lines. There really were too many forcing lines. And I was an open Sicilian player, and it's so hard to keep. Sicilian, it's sound for black. And I didn't really feel like beating my head against the wall against all those forcing lines. Last time, let me see, where are we now? I liked that last time, the English. I'm going to look into it. Did we talk about the English? We probably talked about it a little bit. I'm not sure which English you're talking about, but you can either write it there, or we can just keep talking about the English, or send me an email and we'll go into it. Why did you stop being an e4 player? Okay, yeah, I just mentioned that. And then I played the English after e4, and then I finally switched to d4. But I really I mean, I feel like they're all fine. And I think one thing we found out about modern theory, I noticed Nakamura said it the other day, is that everything's equal for black if he plays it well. So in a sense, it's just a matter of style. What do you think throws your opponent off the most? What gives you positions you're most comfortable with? I don't think anybody could claim that any of those three moves is superior to the other in any objective sense. Okay, English defense. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think the English defense is a lot of fun. Now let me see, I might as well cover a little more territory since we're now approaching the end already. Let me, other things that were asked about. Let's do this one. Let's do, oh, in fact, it's already up here. I got a series of related questions about the French. And okay, now let's switch to the Tarrasch. Okay, so far a main line with 3 knight f6. We just looked at bishop e7 instantly, briefly, just to show you that. Okay, it's this move, which you'll see a fair amount if you play this as black. You'll see that. And it's not a bad move. I mean, it just, how can it be bad? I mean, you're white. You're not going to, black's not going to win by force in any of these positions. It's only the fifth move, and you've made a logical move that puts a little bit of pressure on the center. And if black takes, you've got, actually you can take either way now if I remember right, but that's the way most people take. And in fact, this is one of the main lines, just going like that. And it looks like black's doing really well because there's this backward pawn on an open file. But in fact, this is a pawn structure that white can get decent play out of because this bishop is stuck for a change. You know, I always talk about that bishop not really being a problem in the French, but in this particular one, it really is. It's gonna, because it can't get out this way either. And there's not going to be an f6 move to force the breakup of the center and the bishop coming out this way. So black has some advantages here, but so does white. And this has all been played quite a bit. One other thing you can do here I was going to mention is this funny looking little move. I think white's actually now supposed to be slightly better here. The idea is it looks like you can't play that because of that move, winning this rook in the corner, but then black has all kinds of good play here. Of course, let me, I mean, I know it's check, but what happens after that? Oh, there's nothing attacked. That's right. Okay, so white moves here, and I was thinking that was hanging, but it isn't. So you just break up the center. So here you're only the exchange down, and white's king is stuck in the center, and black has great development, and you're probably going to gain more time in that queen. So that's a nice little trap. What white should do, though, is just retreat and centralize his knight. Now you notice black's having no developmental problems here, but the question is, does white space mean anything? Does his little extra space mean anything? And then a good move is just to go here and defend that, and start working on the light squares is the idea. Play moves like that, maybe like that. On the other hand, white's got space in the center, so he's reasonably happy. Just develop a piece, and then normally you try and break down the queen side with a4 before you do anything else. I don't know if it's worth going too much further, but yeah, I wonder. I think taking is actually one of the better moves here. You can always play b4, but it's kind of interesting way to keep your pieces active, even though you do isolate this one pawn. That's isolated too. I think white's a little better here, actually, just a little. Yeah, actually, I think what he said here, he said he could only find, white was 6-0 in the games he found online. So I looked it up, and it turns out that in Megabase, for example, I didn't look at anything more complicated. There are 48 games, and it's 51% to 49%, and white has a 70-point edge in performance rating, which is maybe slightly less than what he usually has, or almost the same. So it's actually very normal. C4 gives you very normal results, I would say. His analysis, okay, is after, let me see this, C4, C5. See, I think that makes the most sense. Break up the center, and white takes, that's the idea of it. And then he wants to play f4. He said white is 5-0 with a draw in the games that he found. Well, again, the line with c5 and takes has resulted in, I only got 15 games with this, and I got a 53% winning percentage, which is absolutely normal for white. So that means it's good, but not anything special, according to that. But actually, I think, looking at the games, this is not much fun. And this move, I think, is actually almost a mistake. Even though white managed to get equality with this, with a low performance rating. But I just think black's already better here probably because you've made too many slow moves. The idea here is that you've anchored this, so you don't have to worry about that falling. And he says that he found this 5-0 win for white, but in fact it's not. You should really just develop here. And the center might still get broken up, but you're going to be well developed. So that's kind of the idea. I think bishop here is probably the best move, just to put less pressure on these squares. And then I looked at things like this and here, just developing, and then you just castle next. And black should be absolutely fine, but at least white's got his pieces out. The problem with f4 is you're not getting developed. You get black's, and your center's under pressure. It's a bad combination. So black plays here, and already I don't see what white does. He's got some problems getting his pieces out. In this game he played here, which kind of makes sense because it gives room to play there, and maybe the knight will come here later. But of course it gets in the way of the bishop. If he plays here, I think you should just develop. You could also play queen b6, which is absolutely fine, but I want him to commit the bishop first and then play here. And this is just kind of falling apart on this side of the board. So black's a little better already, I think. Another move is to go this way so that you have more room. Your bishop is still coming out and your knight can come here. That one makes total sense, but you've lost a lot of time. And so knight e2. One problem here is if you make that move, okay, I'll give you a second, there's a standard trick, and you'll see this in the French all the time in all kinds of different variations, not just this line at all, that black can play here that makes knight takes d4 a mistake. Okay, does anybody see it? A little fast, but the idea is this, that's the trick. Now if knight takes knight, of course knight takes knight, so you've won a pawn. But if pawn takes, you have check. And not only have you won a pawn, but you've won a center pawn. And the king is exposed, and it's just a very nice position. So that's a trap you should know about. So instead of that, white plays knight e2 in this position, and black plays bishop c5, and all of a sudden you can't get your pawn back easily. The best move is this. And now, instead of just trying to hang on to the pawn desperately, just get all your pieces out and break with the move f6. In fact, you don't even have to play. You could play this and get a small advantage with f6, but you can even play this immediately. And the reason you can do that, this is kind of cute. Maybe one of the last things we'll look at. Very typical French idea is to put the knight there, and that looks kind of crazy, right? But first of all, it's got positive ideas, like of taking there, and after that, these pawns are just monstrously strong, and you're going to get that one back too. So, and you're threatening e4, and there's queen h4 checks, and there's problems getting castled. And it turns out black's just much better here because white can't even get castled. He's going to get kind of walked over here. It's kind of a cute idea, very typical French idea actually. Just try anything to get those center pawns rolling. Okay, the game. We'll do the game, and then we'll not do the next part of the question. We'll just finish the game. Okay, so he breaks that up, and white plays knight b3. It looks totally logical. But for some reason, black's already better here. And the reason is this knight has not been challenged. So look what happens. I don't think it matters much which way he takes. If he goes here, it's even worse. If he takes this way, now we have queen h4 check as a threat. Everybody knows that trick. And bishop b4 check is a huge move, practically winning a piece or forcing the king to some horrendous square. And it turns out there's no answer. There's nothing particular to be done about it. And I'll trust you to take a look at that. But there's no... there's no answer to both those moves that is satisfactory. So black's already on move 9, almost overwhelming position. So instead, he took this way, but then, of course, this bishop can't get out. So even if he played slowly, you'd stand better. But he instead plays the same idea. And now if this knight moves, there's queen h4 check. And otherwise, there's bishop b4 check is a huge threat, winning material. So really the game's already, black has just a great game. The best line, this is simply too fast for black. He's getting everything out. Threatening to take and queen h4 check, it's just winning. So the best line is to actually give up some material this way. And now black, I think, what was I going to do? My fault. Let me just see here. Oh yeah, now if you just castle, white's completely stuck, and black's breaking with f6 and all kinds of other things. But you can also just grab material. The only thing about grabbing material is that even though this is probably objectively winning position for black, because you have a pawn and the exchange, white does have the two bishops. He's got the blockade. He actually has some counter chances. And, who knows if you want to put up with that. Who knows? Because you get such a big advantage by not even allowing it. So it's just a matter of choice. And is there anything else here? Yeah, there's just nothing works here. So in fact, there's a cute line. I'll show you this one. It goes like that. Oh, that looks more logical, right? But this check destroys everything. There's no way to meet that check. White pretty much has to go here, and then you've got this cute move. And does everyone see the point after bishop takes a5? It's this. Whoops. It's this move. Has to take it, and here. Kind of cute. Anyway, these tactics are, believe me, they're in every line. There's no way white can avoid this kind of tactic. It's black's too well developed, and the center is collapsed. So I'm not suggesting that c4 loses or anything, but you've got to be careful. f4 is f4 is already better for black, I think, this position, because it allows black to really destroy the center. You need to start getting your pieces out here fast. You want to play knight here, maybe bishop either here or here, castles, rook e1. Support that square before it falls apart. That's what you should play. And even then, of course, black's fine. So that answers that question, and there's several other parts to that question which I'll get to next week. I think it's getting on in time here for this week. Let me just see. Okay, we got any other questions? Fischer quit chess. Of course, Fischer played d4 against Spassky. What book would we recommend? Oh, easily the best book on the English defense. And there are several good ones, actually, from the old days. But the one that's the most recent, and it's not very recent, but it's the most recent, is by Odesky, O-D-E-S-S-K-Y. A wonderful book, really fun, great reading, really easy to follow, and all kinds of exciting, brilliant lines. The great thing about the English defense is there's tactics just everywhere. So it teaches you tactical, unbalanced chess. It's really good for your chess. What would you say benefits your understanding of the game of chess in general? I guess we've had that kind of question before. Yeah, I think in terms of what to study, I mean, I don't know what really benefits you most. Obviously, playing is going to benefit your understanding because you're going to see positions and have to think about them. But my feeling is, and it's a pretty stereotyped view, but I think it's a good one, is that learn as many structures as you can. Get practice with as many middle game structures you can, which really means openings. Get deep into the opening and study what middle games come from that, and then look at examples. And the more of those you learn, the more patterns you learn, and the more they apply to other positions that are similar. So a great book about the Sveshnikov for black. Well, the famous one, I think John would agree with this, is the Quality Chess book by, who is it? You just have to look up Quality Chess, Grandmaster Repertoire. It's a little old, Rogozenko, I think. I think it's Rogozenko. I hope it's Rogozenko. There are other books on the Sveshnikov. There were a whole bunch of great ones, but they're all a little old now. And that one's a little old now, too. But it's not too old, and it's got huge amounts of detail in it. Who else wrote about the Sveshnikov? I think Sveshnikov himself wrote about the Sveshnikov. But I think your best is that Grandmaster Repertoire book by Quality Chess. So if you look up Quality Chess, go to their catalog, you'll see that one of their Grandmaster Repertoire books is about the Sveshnikov. And I think it's Rogozenko. So take a look. That would be the best one to start with, I think, unless there's been something more recently. Sometimes if you just want to find books, you can go to various book sites and put in the word Sveshnikov or chess and see what kind of pops up. But from what I know, that would be the best thing to do. I think you would like that. Oh, Catronius. Sorry. Okay, there you go. That is the Grandmaster Repertoire one, right, John? It's, in other words, I was wrong. Was I wrong about Rogozenko, or did they both write one about the Sveshnikov? You might want to answer that. I think, okay, so Catronius, who writes for Quality Chess, is probably the one who wrote the book on the Sveshnikov. Is that what you're saying, John? Could you confirm that? Anyway, look up the word Catronius, look up also Rogozenko, because I think he wrote one. And the Catronius book is, I think, the one we're talking about. And that you can just Google that online or go to the Quality Chess website. And thank you. You're welcome. It's great that you guys come on. It makes my day, because for me to be mumbling on and on about stuff, just talking to myself, is not at all as much fun as reacting to questions. And tell your friends, tell them to come on, tell them to come up with questions beforehand, send them to me, or surprise me on the chat. But we need more people. Any students, any young players, I think could get a lot out of this, could have a lot of fun with this, because we're mostly on a fairly much of a student level. So I think we could really have a blast with all this stuff. And I think with that, we've probably gone over enough. We're kind of further enough into the show. I hope I'll see all you guys next week. I thank you for coming on and participating. As I say, send me some questions. Ask I Am Watson at chessclub.com. ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. Any question you want. And prepare things for the chat if you want to. If you don't feel like spending the time on an email, just prepare something for the chat. And thanks, everybody. See you next week.